Hello and welcome to this edition of the ILO's Future of Work podcast. I'm Isabelle Piquer at the ILO in Geneva, and today we are going to talk about rural women, the crucial role they play in agriculture, food security and nutrition, and the struggles they face in their daily lives, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, and how we can build their resilience and empower them. We have two guests today, Reema Nanavaty, who belongs to SIWA, Self-Employed Women's Association, a trade union in India that promotes the rights of low-income, independently employed female workers. With over 1.6 million participating women, SIWA is the largest organization of informal workers in the world. Hello, Reema, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Hello, Isabel. It's my pleasure and privilege.
Also with us is Elisenda Estruch Puertas, Rural Economy Specialist at the ILO. Hello, Elisenda.
Hello, Isabel, and hello, Reema.
So let's start the conversation with you, Reema. Rural women have been at the front lines of the pandemic, even as their unpaid care and domestic work increased during lockdowns. Reema, has the situation in India improved in recent months for rural women? What are women telling you about what they've been through? Do we see signs of recovery?
Hello, Isabel and Elisenda. And I think you asked a very important question that yes, the situation of COVID 19 is gradually receding, including in the rural areas. We see less and less people now getting infected with the COVID infection. We see less of hesitancy as well. So, rural women are also coming out for getting vaccinated. But I think the last 1.5 year has been very disruptive to the lives and livelihoods of the rural women. While most of the economic activities came to a standstill, it was the agriculture sector that absorbed the most of the shock. It also had to also provide livelihood and sustenance to the millions of migrant workers which were returning home from the cities. I also still remember that one of our very oldest members from the villages in a dry desert area, she was calling me when the lockdown was announced, and she said she's worked her whole life extremely hard pursuing multiple livelihood activities just to feed her family of six, but she says that this COVID 19 has destroyed us completely. Not only has their livelihoods been destroyed, even the government's National Rural Employment Guarantee work has stopped. There's no transportation. And to top it all, there were unseasonal rains because of climate change, which destroyed their standing crops. So, how do I feed my family? That was her question that she was telling me, and she says that just because we are poor, we don't have any self respect and a right to live. And you were left with no answer. And the situation of the small farmers was different, but that of the agriculture laborers or workers was even worse, because the farmers would even be able to sell their harvest when the markets would open. But what do the agriculture laborers do? So Kailash Ben, one of the agriculture laborers, she was saying that no one talks about or thinks about agriculture workers. Don't we have the right to live? All we need is work to sustain our lives. And she said it's like walking on a double-edged sword. So I think, and then there was the second wave, which was very fierce and deadly, and as a result, we lost some 400 and 391 members of Seva, our sisters. 266 sisters lost their husbands, and over 1,017 members reported death in their families. And we have some close to 52 children who became orphans. So they've lost both their parents. So I think the COVID pandemic led to asset erosion. It led to destruction of their livelihoods and lives. And I think the children's education has been also affected. We see a lot of dropouts. So to give an example, Anjana Parmar, who is a 36-year-old mother of two, she lost her husband to COVID. He was working as a daily wager as an electrician, and they had very meager savings, and she used to use it to pay the fees of her children, but now she had to use it up for her husband's treatment and then his funeral. So she says that I don't know from where will I manage or even my next meal, and the result is that she has to remove her sons from school. So this is the reality of how women are embracing the situation due to COVID. We don't know when the post-COVID is likely to be there.
So, Rima, in these extremely difficult circumstances that you are describing, what are the three most urgent measures that should be taken to alleviate their situation? What are women telling you they want first?
What our members are saying and what we have learned from our past almost 5 decades of experience is that they do not want charity, but all they want is immediate work. And what we have also seen that what will be really very important is access to universal social protection, and this includes skill building, skill enhancement, skill diversification, access to immediate primary health care, childcare services, insurance, food security. In short, we call it as full employment, which is work and income security, access to basic support services and food security. And unless and until you ensure that, then only the women and their households will be able to have a minimum income, which is there. And when there is a minimum income, then only and that is possible only when the livelihoods are stabilized. And therefore, I think what we are trying to work on is to set up a livelihood recovery and resilience fund for these rural workers. Because in the current crisis, the livelihoods have been destroyed, savings and other assets have eroded, and the women workers are facing acute work, income, and most importantly, food insecurity. So that's the biggest challenge, and we are trying to address that. On top of it, with the migrants returning to the villages, the stress on the rural economy has increased, exacerbating the issues and challenges around gender inequality, gender pay gap. You find that there is preferential employment of men over women. So I think another important aspect, therefore, what we are trying to see to address this is how do you ensure access to energy, clean energy, green energy to address the issue of poverty. So, in short, how do you build an economy which is a nurturing economy?
Elisenda, give us a broader picture of the effect of the pandemic on rural women around the world. What Rima is telling us, this extremely difficult situation, is telling us about India. Is it true also for rural women in other countries?
Indeed, the stories that it's an honor to be listening to what Rima is sharing with us today, because these are stories from Ranima, from Kalash Ben, from Anjana, are telling us many of the elements that are important also for other rural women, especially in developing countries, in these challenging times, no, of the COVID-19 pandemic. Let me just highlight a few issues. So first, the effects of the pandemic have reminded us that women play vital roles in agri-food systems and the rural economies. So Just two figures. Rural women comprise about a quarter of the world's population. That's big numbers. And they make up about 41% of the world's agricultural labor force. And they work as farmers, wage earners, and entrepreneurs, as the examples Reema has shared. So I think this gives us the importance of that really women are a backbone of many rural economies around the world. At the same time, a second element to bear in mind is that the pandemic's impact on the world of work has been devastating and far reaching. And women and young people and migrant workers have been among the groups that have been very much affected. And in particular to rural women, I think the impacts of the pandemic have let bare the prevailing constraints. So they were facing many difficulties and that they have been further exacerbated because of these challenging times. For example, they were and are often concentrated in low skilled, low productivity, jobs with low pay, and as Rima was saying, with limited access to social protection. So, for many rural women, in the context of the pandemic, they were not covered by health insurance or income protection. So, they were exposed to even larger levels of vulnerability. A third element of reflection, as I was hearing to Rima, and that I want to share is that many rural women shoulder a disproportionate burden of unpaid care and household work, and that includes food provision, caring for children, for the sick, for the elderly. And we have to keep in mind as well that many poor households in rural areas of developing countries, it's rural women, the one that go collecting water or food, and even it might be younger or even girls that take care of these responsibilities. And those go often unreported, invisible, but yet are very important for the well-being of the families, of the communities. And this burden has increased with the COVID-19 crisis because schools were closed, because there were care needs that increased, because household members got sick, and this additional burden of unpaid work, it's preventing women in rural areas of engaging in more productive, more rewarding activities and new opportunities in the rural economy and to advance in the world of work. And an element that is important and it emerges in many stories we hear about rural women is about how restrictive can be certain social norms and gender stereotypes that, for example, can limit the access of women farmers in accessing land or even important services such as financial services or agricultural extension, which provides technical assistance and also many rural women or entrepreneurs or wage earners are facing difficulties in accessing other services, and that can include employment services or even business support. So I think it's important also to bear in mind those social norms and gender stereotypes. And a last point, as I was reflecting and hearing about Rima, is that we have seen that organizations like SIWA have an important role to play in addressing a very important challenge, that is addressing the lack of voice and representation that many rural women face around the world. And they are often underrepresented in workers and employers organizations as well as other kinds of rural organizations. And where we see this gap larger, so where it's in leadership and managerial positions. So this has implications. For example, rural women might not have such a strong say of their own now that the policy process towards the recovery are being discussed and are being designed.
Thank you, Elisenda. So, Rima, because of what Elisenda is describing, because of all these problems you were telling us, and also because they are underrepresented and they face all this increasing hardship because of COVID pandemic. In a way, because we're talking about that, do you think that the role that women and girls play in rural households and their contribution to a more sustainable agri-food sector is being increasingly recognized in a way because we are talking about all these problems?
I think she really brought about this very important aspect, and women and young girls both play a very important role and also responsibility of fulfilling the family's food and nutritional needs. In fact, I would go to say that they play a very major role in the entire food value system. So, as a farmer or as a small farmer or a family farmer in production, in processing, in marketing, in trading, in the grain market, then in making decisions of food and in consumption and purchase of food at the household level, they also play a major role in food waste disposal and activities such as composting, producing biogas. So, which is like a circular economy in itself, and I would like to say that despite their important role in the food system, um, there are still gender discrimination, and therefore women have been facing constraint, as Elisenda was referring to, as lack of land ownership, access to other productive resources, and an ecosystem to increase their voices and also their income. So I think we still have some long way to go in bringing visibility of women and girls in the food value chain or in the agri-food sector. And I think one important aspect is that how do you organize and build women's own collectives, cooperatives, enterprises, so that women just don't remain agriculture laborers or workers or small farmers, but they also become owners and managers. Their farm also becomes an enterprise. And let me give you an example of Seva's members have formed some 25,000 women have formed their own agribusiness enterprise, and they procure grain process from these small farmers. They package it and then do door to door delivery through a cadre of saleswomen whom we call it as Rudy Ben. So this is under the brand of Rudy. And during COVID, also, Rudy became so relevant because the women were there right at the doorstep, providing the needed nutrition and foods to the rural households, even though the transportation was not there and the markets are closed. But Rudy was decentralized, and so we procured from the farmers as well, and that enabled the value chain to continue. So it provided nutrition and food security, it provided market access to the farmers, and as a result the turnover of Rudy increased. So I think the lesson here is that the more decentralized and local the supply chain, it brings more recognition to the role of women and girls in the food system. And then I think we also have another enterprise which is called Kamla, where the traditional coarse grains are all going out from circulation, and the processed packaged food of multinationals is taking its place. So we've trained some 2,000 women into making snacks, into bakery and culinary using these coarse grains. And so they make biscuits, bread, cookies, crunchies, and that is also packaged and distributed in the villages. So as a result, the youth are now getting encouraged to prefer coarse grains and millets compared to the processed and packaged food. So I think if we have these kind of initiatives where the women are the owners and managers, the women own the whole supply chain, and the supply chain is local and decentralized, then I think it brings the recognition of the role that women play in the agri-food system.
Thank you very much, Rima. And I would like you to tell us a little bit more about what Siwa is doing, the amazing work is doing with workers that produce salt, that work in a particularly dire situation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I'm so glad that you also are remembering the poorest of the poor rural workers. These are the women who live and work in the desert for almost about 8 to 9 months of the year, and they produce the rock salt, the inland salt from the desert, and they live in very uninhabitable climatic conditions, very scorching heat and strong hot winds blowing, and then in the desert winters. And previously, they used to use diesel pumps for pumping the brine for about 24 hours for almost 3 months of the year, and barely earning a net income of 150 to $200 at the end of the entire season. That's the whole year. So these life of these salt pan workers, whom we call as the Agaria women, was like that of bonded laborers, and it was full of challenges: lack of access to skills, working capital, high operational costs, no direct access to market or affordable credit, or even clean and efficient energy, and exploitation by traders, cartel. On top of that, the uninhabitable working conditions. So we started organizing these salt pan workers, and today we have close to 15,000 women workers. Um, and the first thing was to provide them with technical trainings to improve the quality of salt so that you could reach out to the directly to the market. But we found that, in spite of that, how their majority of their earnings was going away in buying the diesel oil. And that's where SEVA facilitated these women workers with affordable access to solar pumps through an innovative financing solution. So as a result, there are no recurring costs associated with the solar pumps, and in 3 to 5 years, it helps them completely resolve the working capital issue, which was making them, exploited by the traders or money lenders. So today, SEVA has facilitated over 3,000 poor salt pan workers with access to solar pump. And this really proves that asset creation at the grassroots level is the surest way to fight poverty. And it also proves what I had said in the beginning, that poor women do not want charity, but they need an enabling policy environment and innovative financial tools and instruments. So today, during the off season, these women are setting up the first ever women-owned a solar park. So the energy, that the electricity that would be generated would be sold to the grid, and that would bring an additional income into the hands of these women so that they are able to repay back their loans quite, you know, um, efficiently. So similarly, SEVA has connected some 500 poor smallholder households to clean and green solar pumps for irrigation, and it has not only benefited them by having access to clean energy, but it also brought additional support in areas of cultivation, cropping intensity, support to animal husbandry, reduction in wastage of water, time, drudgery, air and noise pollution. And this that way, even though small, but collectively the women are contributing in reducing their carbon footprints, and countries ndcs and also the sdg that we all believe in.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in this description of the poorest of the poor, as you very well describe them, Rima, we also see one of the goals of the recovery that we have started to talk about in the world, fighting poverty, empowering the most vulnerable. Elisenda, is becoming more and more evident that the recovery will be very different from country to country and from population to population. From the ILO perspective, how can we take into account the needs of rural women in this recovery?
Yes, indeed, we have learned also about these stories, no, and these efforts that Siwa went and impressive results actually in these challenging contexts, such as the desert and production and so on and so forth, and how to turn it into a cycle, no, of prosperity and a more vibrant, even in this difficult context. So indeed, we hear that from the stories that Rima has shared, and also from other contexts, that challenges are in many fronts. So efforts need to go, as Rima was saying, no, along an enabling environment as well, no, and sort of an ecosystem. I think she used this word. Well, much will depend, of course, on the country's circumstances and what are the needs of the specific populations, and when those needs need to be heard and considered. And then what I can share as well is that, well, the challenges are many, but they are also interrelated. So they called for integrated approaches in how we define our response. So that's why the ILO offers an integrated framework for rural women's empowerment. So that's underpinned, well, of course, on the international labor standards, in the respect for the rights of work, employment promotion, social dialogue, and social protection. And you might think, what do we mean by that, and what can we do more specifically? So, well, we have to put attention and in creating decent jobs for rural women. Rima has mentioned several times that women don't want charity. They want to be empowered, to be enabled to make their contribution to build a more vibrant rural economy. So we can facilitate them as well access to entrepreneurship training and to finance, while promoting a transition, no, from informality towards formality. And in order to reduce, we have discussed as well their time constraints. No, we mentioned that burden that they often have. It's important to continue improving access to rural infrastructure. The example was mentioning about energy, and there is also why not also improving connectivity and access to new technologies, for example, and improving also water systems and more sustainable practices also in rural areas. And all this is key. And this integrated framework also looks at more, how can we call it, more transformative perspective to combat gender inequality and to empower rural women, and thinking also of the new generation. So that also means making rural areas more attractive to the younger generation and providing access to other kinds of services. And that includes also, of course, care facilities, health services, access to quality education, and also to culture and other kinds of activities. And this will avoid perpetuating, no, cycles of inequality and poverty towards the next generation. Let's break those cycles. And importantly, I think, and what we have heard also from Siwa, and it's to keep ensuring and strengthening the voices of rural women so that their needs can be taken into account, and that they can have a say in the policy responses towards the recovery. So in a short sentence, so promoting decent work and putting it at the center of all our efforts to rural women's empowerment and pursuing this transformative agenda towards gender equality, I think we can make a change, because it's time for changing things, to do more and to do it better as well. And we have to keep always in mind that empowering rural women will have a significant impact, not only on productivity in agriculture, but also in improving food security and in achieving a recovery in rural economies that it's inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And that means ensuring that no one is left behind, that no rural woman is left behind. Thanks.
Thank you, Elisenda, for giving us this broader view. Thank you, Reema, for telling us what's happening on the ground and what SIWA is doing. Thank you both for your time for our podcast on rural women. Our guests today were Reema Nanavaty, member of SIWA, and Elisenda Estruch Puertas, rural economy specialist at the ILO. Please join us again soon for another edition of the ILO Future of Work podcast. Goodbye.